know before you kick the bucket. We're so glad to see all of you here. My name is Barb Lee. Sarah had another meeting this morning, so I'm filling in for Sarah. So a few reminders. Please silence your cell phones. Turn on your T-coil if you have one. If there's time for questions, we'll come around with mics, so please speak directly into the microphone. And after the program, if you're able, please help put your chair up on the dollies provided. I am delighted to have another opportunity to introduce today's speaker. He's probably familiar to everyone here, but just in case, if you are a newcomer to Grinnell, I will tell you that Dr. James R. Paulson is a retired family practitioner who served in the Grinnell community for 42 years. In addition to his daily practice, he served for more than 30 years as hospice medical director, and he also created the Grinnell Area Mental Health Consortium, JPK, which promotes access to mental health care for all. Today is part one of his two-part lecture, Coping, Parenting, and Grandparenting in the Digital Age. Please join me in welcoming Dr. J.R. Paulson.
How's the sound in the back? Do you want to get the lights? Okay, good. Well, thank you for your attendance, and I hope this is stimulating. As with most of my bucket classes, you need to fasten your seatbelts because I'll be trucking along. But fortunately, it goes on YouTube, so if you want to go back and see some things or send it to somebody else. So I got interested in this because of the mental health crisis that we have, that I saw both as a doctor and we see in the United States and the world. So the title of this is Coping, Parenting, and to get your audience, Grandparenting or Great-Grandparenting in the Digital Age. The problem. Each generation over time has always complained and found fault with the younger generation or generations. We've all heard and are tired of hearing, when I was a kid, we did blah, blah, blah. And in school and at home. And if we ever did or said such and such, we got blah, blah, blah. We worked for what we got. We respected our parents, teachers, and leaders, even if we didn't agree with them. Well, folks, I'm here to tell you, it's not just your imagination. There is trouble right here in River City. And in fact, all over the world. There has been a seismic change in the last several generations, mainly Gen Z and Gen Alpha. And we'll define them later. They've been the first generations that have come through puberty in the digital age, and it's made profound changes, not only on their behaviors and attitudes, but on the actual hardwiring of their brains. The outline for this presentation, part one today. We'll have an introduction, and I'm going to compare it to climate change. We'll go over the evidence for a significant decline in the mental health of youth over time. We're going to talk about smartphone and social media use. Is there real cause or just an association? How social media affects boys and girls differently, and it does. Other harmful effects of overuse of social media. The rewiring of the brains of an entire generation. And the harmful effects of safetyism and overprotection of our children. And finally, how Gen Z feels about smartphones and social media themselves. And then the next part two, will be where to go from here. There are two major causes of the current situation. The most obvious one is the overuse of smartphones, and more specifically, the influence of social media. So, what is social media? Well, Wikipedia says it's an interactive technology, facilitates the creation, sharing, and aggregation of content across virtual communities and networks. Over 5 billion people in 2024 use it, and over 60% of the world's population. That is incredible. However, a second enabling phenomena has been the overprotection of our children in the real world and underprotection in the digital one. And I'll explain that as we go on. I'm going to use the analogy of climate change for this presentation. What are your beliefs and attitude toward climate change? And smartphone use. Are your beliefs based on conspiracy theories, politics, or facts? Or on personal experiences? And they often have the greatest effect on our beliefs and attitudes. Not what we think up here, but what we've seen and experienced ourselves. I think many of us, because of our personal experiences like the derecho, think that there may be something to this climate change thing. But what's the evidence? What's the hard evidence to back up this assertion or theory? What are and would be the signs of climate change? And do you personally notice any of these? I don't know about you, but I think I'm aware of a lot or most of those. But we need data, not just for a few years, but accumulated over many years to see any real trends. One piece of data is a plot of temperature records since the 1950s. Let's go back even further to 1880. And I think you can see there's a little spike that occurs near the end of that time. Last July, Al Roker announced on NBC that we had just experienced the hottest day ever recorded on planet Earth. What would be the consequences of climate change? And, of course, then what would be the consequences of overuse of social media? So we're all aware of climate change, some of the consequences. And if I convince you today the evidence and the facts are clear and persuasive, showing the detrimental effects of climate change, what could and what should, that's a value judgment, should be our proactive strategies to ameliorate the problem? I like the National Parks response strategy, and I'll relate it to this presentation. Today's presentation will focus on understanding the problem and convincing you there really is one. Possible solutions will be alluded to, but the next presentation will deep dive into how to mitigate, adapt, and communicate solutions. 2 years ago, we had an expert from Iowa State brought here by the Mental Health Consortium, Doug Gentile, speak to us in the high school auditorium on the effects of digital media. Gentile's study did not quantitate how much time was spent by the kids or on which devices. Any device, be it a TV, computer, iPad, tablet, or smartphone, produced the same effects. Why parents should keep media out of kids' bedrooms. And his findings: poorer school performance, greater risk of obesity, higher likelihood of video addiction, and a greater likelihood of aggressive behavior, just by having them in the bedroom. Today, the average kid, that's just average, from 8 to 18, is in front of a screen over 50 hours a week. Think of that. Fast forward to the last summer. Surgeon General wants to put a warning label, which would require congressional action, remind parents and adolescents that social media has not been proven safe. Just like the warnings on a pack of cigarettes, this is the warning he proposes. Is this overhyped and alarmist, or something that we really need to address, and now? The theme of this presentation is partly based on a recent book by Jonathan Haidt. Some of you may be reading it now or have read it. He's a social psychologist at New York University. A significant portion of the contents and graphs in this presentation are derived from his book. He provides abundant footnotes to document the data presented, especially the graphs. I have sought to verify and back up his findings by using other sources in my own experiences. I basically agree with his findings and have seen them develop and evolve over 6 decades, not only as a parent, but as an elementary and high school teacher, and as a family physician taking care of children and young adults for over 40 years in private practice. And I think many of you will have had the long-term experiences that I've had. So let's start with the evidence. Is there really a problem? Like climate change, is there hard evidence? Or is this just another conspiracy theory and fake news and exaggeration? Well, let's take a look at anxiety. This graph shows the rise in anxiety and the rates in different generations. Notice the gray area. It will be highlighted. And if I can find my laser pointer, see this gray area here? You're going to see that on almost all the graphs. And why? It starts around 210 and goes up further, but the starting point of that. And that's very good for reference. And gee, it happens to be the time that most people began having smartphones. The first iPhone was introduced by Steve Jobs in June of 2007, followed in 2009 by the first Android by Samsung. And you can see, wherever generation you're in, baby boomers down there, and the rest of us, we haven't seen a big increase in anxiety, but as the generations get younger, you see the curves go up. What about depression? What's been happening to United States teens over the past 20 years? And do you see a pattern here? I don't know about you, but I do, particularly in girls and boys. And gee, look where it starts. Notice this data is pre-COVID. So everything you learn about COVID, well, of course, we're more on our thing. No, this data is before that. Let's spend some time on this graph. And it's got a bunch of complicated things in here, but it's got depressive symptoms in girls. It's got internet hours, and it's got social media use, all colored differently. Well, I think we can see that all of them seem to go up dramatically right at this time. Isn't that coincidence that that's also when the majority of American kids and people owned a smartphone? What about other countries? This graph was compiled from data on 19,000 British children born around the year 2000. What key takeaway points do you see here? Anybody? Is there a dose curve relationship? Do you see more hours on the phone? More problems with symptoms of depression? I certainly do. And also see that the girls is much higher than the boys, and we'll have to explain that. Well, we got a lot of problems in our world. This is just a few of them. So maybe this increase in anxiety and depression is just related to what's been happening socially, economically, and politically in the United States and around the world. But what were we baby boomers exposed to growing up? Well, as baby boomers growing up, we witnessed assassination of Martin Luther King, John F. Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy. We had to deal with the Vietnam War and its mandatory draft. Politics was super polarized then, and we witnessed Watergate. There was the Cuban Missile Crisis with its terrifying threat of World War III. I even remember as far back in elementary school having drills how to protect yourself from nuclear attack by getting under your desk. We all did it, but looking back now, I go, oh yeah, that was going to help a lot. But we did not display anywhere close to the rates of mental illness, including anxiety and depression, we see today. So we went through, excuse the language, a hell of a lot, and the times are pretty turbulent, but it didn't seem to goof us up too much. Well, some of us it did. However, there's no denying the pressures and world events are placed on all of us today. Social media hurts girls more than boys. Should have been apparent from the previous graph. Let's look at the data for actual ER visits. Remember that in the earlier slide, depression was based on self-reported symptoms. Maybe we're just asking them more about their feelings, and they are, in fact, just becoming more aware of them. With more media awareness placed on mental health, a good thing, maybe they're just more open to express their real feelings. Or yeah, they were depressed before, but they would never mention anything about it. Well, however, these statistics show it's not just about feelings of depression, but about behaviors that can be measured and quantified. Now let's take a look at U.S. hospitalizations. That's not just going to the ER, that's being hospitalized for intentional self-harm. Girls 15 to 19. And what do you notice on those curves? Girls much higher than boys. When does it take off? The start of the gray area, but it's also increased in boys. Now, ages 15 to 19. Let's look at younger girls, ages 10 to 14. Think of that on your kids and grandkids. Look at the increase in girls. I don't know about you, but that is very impressive, scary data. This naturally leads us to the question, why are young girls more vulnerable to the influence of social media? Well, these are all the social media platforms and number of millions of active users. And I'm not going to go over them, but you can see up there that Facebook and YouTube, WhatsApp on there. And there's a difference of the sexes of what they prefer to use. I highlighted 3 areas with my arrows showing that, girls are red, more on Facebook, more on Pinterest, a lot more than the guys, and then also down on Instagram. Let's dive deeper and see why social media affects girls more than boys. Jonathan Haidt said, social media is taking a dangerous toll on teenage girls. The evidence is clear. Smartphones are the major cause. He posits the major cause of the mental illness epidemic among young women. Well, girls versus boys. Brain differences might explain tech behaviors. Why is this? Girls and boys are different. That's a generalization. Reason 1, girls are more affected by social comparison and perfectionism. You can agree or disagree, but this is a general trend. 2, girls' aggression is more relational versus physical. 3, girls more easily share emotions and disorders. 4, girls are more subjected to predation and harassment. I agree with Haidt. From facial looks to weight comparison and even gender dysphoria, the mass exposure to this type of media harms girls much more than boys. Here's a picture of a girl, in the right lower quadrant, what she really looks like, but before she posts anything, she's got all these different things that she can do to change her behavior and make her appearance and make it look better than it is. Because she sees these other beautiful girls all around, and she's not that good, but she can manipulate. The business model, how social media captures girls. The model by all the big social media corporations use the model developed by Facebook. Maximize time spent on the platform and extract data. They exploit the fact that girls are especially anxious about their body image. Social media algorithms send them links about looks and body image and how to look better. Instagram and TikTok send them images of very thin women if they show any interest at all in beauty, weight loss, or even healthy eating. I was impressed by this research. They created a fake accounts, a dozen of them, on TikTok, registered to 13-year-old girls. TikTok doesn't check to see who you are or really what your age, so they made up these. And they found that TikTok's algorithm served them, and underline this, tens of thousands of weight loss videos within a few weeks of joining the platform. And some of the videos included many emaciated young women that looked like they got out of a concentration camp. Facebook itself commissioned a study of how Instagram, that's their competition, was affecting teens in the US and the UK. But a whistleblower for Facebook told the Wall Street Journal that Instagram was especially bad for girls, noting that social comparison is worse and increasing rates of anxiety and depression. Snapchat's filters keep the focus on the face, whereas Instagram focuses heavily on body and lifestyles. Boys and girls, typically, but not exclusively. Boys tend to be more physical, more on violence and threatening behavior. You can observe guys, watch what they do. Girls, typically more relational bullying, gossiping, rumors, exclusion, more difficult to observe. Girls' aggression is more relational than physical. Boys are generally more interested in watching movies or playing games involving sports, fighting, war, or violence. Who would win a physical fight or fling an insult without fear of violent reprisal? Girls know that the real way to hurt another girl is hit her ego or her relationships. You spread gossip about her, turn her friends against her, or lower her value as a friend to other girls. Or you post unflattering images that can never be erased. If a girl's sociometer drops too low due to ostracism or depression, physical death may offer a way out, whereas social death is a living hell. My observations have generally, but not always, confirmed these observations. Girls are more subject to predation and harassment. Study of 16,000 Massachusetts high school students in 2019 said 1 out of 10 boys get significantly bullied, but the rate was twice as high for girls. More significantly, the mode of bullying has increasingly gone cyber versus physical. Social media makes it easy for anyone of any age to bully anonymously with no personal or physical repercussions. Remember when we were kids, if you made a comment to somebody, you better watch out, because the girl or the guy might respond. Now you can do it anonymously to anybody. I think that's a very huge point. This possibility makes teens, especially girls, continuously anxious, since any potential misstep can rapidly go viral and leave a permanent social mark. This only fuels the insecurity that is already a natural part of puberty. In addition, there's an additional problem for girls. More girls than boys tend to be super users. Well, what is super users? Much higher than the girls. More than 40 hours a week. Think of that, more than a full-time job. Well, how do you do that? Super users can be on up to 18 or 19 hours a day. You go, how can that happen? Well, first of all, they're only sleeping about 6 or 7 hours, which we'll get to. But here's a breakdown. They're multitasking. They talk to you in person, but they're looking at their phone. Or your mom watching a soccer game, but you're not really watching the soccer game. You're on your phone scrolling. Another important symptom that has been increasing, and we can measure, is loneliness. Teens around the world are lonelier than a decade ago. The reason may be smartphones. It's another chart in Haight's book, where when you notice the tending start to rise on this graph, often feel lonely. Girls and boys. Let's look back to the 90s to get a bigger picture of the change. Take a look here on this, and I think you can see there's a pretty impressive point where the iPhone is released, and then all of a sudden people are more lonely or often feel left out. Daily average time with friends. The other more I consider insidious and harmful effect of digital media overuse is that it takes away from time from other activities. Perhaps the most important one is, I think, less person-to-person time with friends. When the curve starts down, and with which generation? The most pronounced effect is on Gen Z. We'll also have to explain the decrease that started before the introduction of the smartphones. So, okay, here's the smartphone, and notice going down the time you're getting together with friends. I don't know about you, but I got together with my friends every day when I was a kid, every day. sometimes multiple times a day. These kids aren't getting together with it, particularly Gen Z. And notice the age difference here. But something was going on back here that we'll talk to in a few minutes, talk about. We have to ask the question, why the difference? Well, Gen Z and Gen Alpha grew up, went through puberty, did all their learning with smartphones. Gen Z is lonely, but I don't know about you, I can see that it's affected the rest of the whole population here. It isn't exclusively the kids that are more lonely. Last year, Dr. Murthy drew attention to loneliness as a major health risk factor for all of us. I don't know if any of you have seen this slide, but it's worth showing. Lacking social connection is dangerous as smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. Now, let me point out, this is mortality. This is dying, folks. This isn't having a heart attack or stroke. This is dying. And look where lack of social connection is compared to smoking, drinking 6 alcoholic drinks a day. So you're all here and you're part of a socially connected environment. But if you're not, it's really a big medical risk problem. Another book I highly recommend by Dr. Murthy, Together. Closely related to loneliness is satisfaction with oneself. And if you look at this, big plunge going back in the 90s, that's how well you feel about yourself. And this is 8th, 10th, and 12th graders, how satisfied they felt with themselves. Low self-esteem, when it becomes unbearable, can lead to self-harming. As we've already seen, self-harming and cutting occurs mainly in girls. It was rare for me to see cutting either in the office or in the ER prior to 1910. I don't know about the other family docs think, but I didn't see cutting before that. And then all of a sudden, why are we seeing all these girls cutting themselves? Pardon? Excuse me, 2000, yeah. I wasn't around practicing then. I'm old, but thank you for the correction. Now, this slide points out that this is a worldwide phenomena, not just in River City. Shows very similar curves. And the first slide is in the US. The second in the UK. The third on the bottom, Ontario, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. You could swap those graphs out. And again, the data is pre-COVID. What about boys and social media and digital use? I think that's important to point out. So far, the graphs we've seen talk about depression, anxiety in boys. However, if we look closer, there are 4 areas of real concern for boys. Boys commit suicide at a higher rate than girls. Boys are heavy users of video games, heavier users of pornography, and many boys are stuck in a failure to launch mode. Suicide. It says the suicide's second leading cause of death among youth. Do you know what number 1 is? Gun violence. When are we politically going to admit that this is a national health care emergency and do something about it? And notice that this data for suicide on boys over the last 20 years and is going up, the total number of suicides. But, as I just was alluded to, boys have always been much higher on suicide than girls. This goes back to 1975. What about in the UK? Same pattern. Males, so you can't say, oh, it's a cultural thing in the United States. News for family physicians, October 23rd. That's not too old, folks. That's just last fall. I don't know about you, but this statistic blew me away. CDC, 1 in 10 high schoolers have attempted suicide. CDC, United States. I don't know if anything is a call to arms about mental health and cell phone addiction, but that certainly is one of them. Higher risk were if you didn't have connection to school, or if you were female, you were black, Hispanic, or LGBTQ. Why would the suicide rates be higher for LGBT? Well, could be bullying, could it be attacks on the internet? Key takeaways. Frequent social media use, bullying, and racism were associated with poor mental health among the high school students. Protective factors, what? Exercise, sleep, engagement at home and in school. They're in 4-H, they're in band, they're in other activities with other kids. Video games. What do we know about video gaming? Well, there's studies, we have a lot of data. Most of the time, limited use can actually have some beneficial effects, particularly during COVID, if you were playing with others. See, overuse, like most other things in life, and the susceptibility of addiction in some individuals that leads to deteriorating mental health. Over time, gamers use gaming to distract themselves from loneliness and rely on the games themselves instead of building long-term friendships. Overuse then leads to more anxiety, loneliness, and depression. It's a downward spiral. So there's a scale for classification. Casual users, 87% estimate, no problem engaged, 4% problematic. They have a couple addictive behaviors, 7%, and fully addicted for the diagnostic manual, and they spend at least 15 to 20 hours a week, but usually more, and that's about 7% of users. What about South Korea? Other countries the same? No, it's a national crisis over there. It's a huge problem. And this is, they have a lot of these things called PC cafes or PC bangs, where the kids go, they play video games, and they can do it 24/7. And they can eat there, and some of them even have smoking sections. They're professional gamers and teams. They can be paid good money for winning. Tournaments are very popular and broadcast on television. They're probably the undisputed world champs. But 7% of addiction here, 20%, or 1 out of 5 in South Korea. That is a huge national problem. And the WHO recognized it as a real disease problem. And so South Korea, as of July 1st, 2025, put it in their list of diseases. Pornography. Let's take a look at pornography. Maybe its use is just overhyped. Besides, boys have been using it forever, and of course girls too, but to a much lesser degree. Years ago, or when many of us came of sexual age, porn was limited to basically Playboy, magazines, then VHS tapes and DVDs. But with the advent of the internet, the pornography industry exploded. Playboy copies sold in 54,000. Pornhub visitors per minute in 2019, 80,000. I did the math on that, and that's a 5,256% increase. Pornography makes up a fourth of the most visited websites in the United States. Data from the National Library of Medicine called pornography use in the United States a porndemic. And the industry, I'll come back to this, had an estimated over $100 billion in revenues last year. $100 billion. Made more money than NFL, Major League Baseball, and all of Hollywood combined. Who's watching? Average age is 9 when boys first view porn. But many of you will say, not my child or husband. Wrong. These 5 factoids should make you rethink the issue, and this is an old slide. So it shows that 90% of kids age have used it, percent of the internet. 1 in 6 women. But overuse of pornography in boys and men can have serious and dangerous consequences. affects their relationships, libido, addiction, and treatment of the opposite sex. Any of you familiar with PIED, P-I-E-D? It's an acronym. I'd been a sex therapist for over 40 years, and I'd only seen this condition recently. That's 20 and 30-year-olds, men coming in the office with erectile dysfunction. They've often gone ahead and ordered some Viagra online, which they can do without a prescription now. And if that doesn't work, they go to these clinics advertised on TV. You've seen the Limitless Male clinics, and they draw blood, and they say, oh, you're low in testosterone, and give them testosterone shots, which, of course, eventually shuts down their own hormone system, and now they're worse off than when they started. So that's a new medical disorder that I started seeing. Overuse of pornography affects the wiring of the developing brain and greatly decreases normal interpersonal interactions. I don't know about you, but it was normal when we were going through puberty to do things that were awkward and frightening, like asking a girl to dance in the junior high gym, walking all the way across by yourself, asking her, and then decided if you came back, if she said yes or no. Very anxiety-producing, or asking someone out on a date. Heavy use of pornography leads boys to choose the easiest option for sexual satisfaction rather than engaging in the more uncertain and risky real-world dating. After watching porn, heterosexual men find real women less attractive, including their own partners. A meta-analysis of 50 studies, that's a lot, from 10 countries, including 50,000 participants, consumption was associated with lower interpersonal satisfaction. And heavy users as teens turn into men that are less able to find sex, love, and marriage in the real world. Why today's teens are having so much less sex, less curious and less interested in courting. Social media and smartphones have changed the way people communicate. And you say, well, that's good, they're having less sex, isn't that good? And I go, no, not really. Young people are having less sex than their parents did at their age, and research are exploring why. This survey from California, this is young men, 18 to 30, had no sexual partners during the last year. Look how that's gone up in the young age group. Let's talk about teen dating violence. Ponder these statistics. 1 in 3 adolescents in the United States is a victim of physical, sexual, or emotional or verbal abuse. 1 out of 3. That is a lot. And as a parent, I find this shocking. The violence, yes, but what I highlighted over here is another take-home point. Up here, only 33% of teens who were in a violent relationship ever told anyone about the abuse. So 1 in 3. So you, your kids, your grandkids, your great-grandkids, they're being sexually or physically abused, but they're not telling mom or dad or doctors or anybody about it. 2/3 are not telling them about it. 25%. Young people now learn what's normal sex, not from parents, teachers, and books and magazines, or even real-life dating, but from the internet and social media. How we've studied rough sex and sexual choking. Now, choking? Do you think these dating behaviors are just rare occurrences? Oh, let's choke somebody while we're having sex with them. This data is from Midwestern schools like Iowa State. Could be Grinnell College. And the study there shows widespread survey from 21 reveals 58% of U.S. college students had experienced choking during sex. Think of that, folks. I don't know about when you were dating, and I was, but if I started to choke my gal I was dating, man, I was smacked where that was the end of that relationship. 68%. And this study is already a number of years old. How choking during sex became normalized. Cause for an overhaul in sex education. I don't have time to read this, but this gal in Charlotte says, yeah, it's non-consensual. All of a sudden, this guy I liked starts choking me every time we had sex. And then she says, got to the point, well, I guess that's just part of normal intimacy, really. But she says, no, it shouldn't be. And where are they getting it from? You look at Pornhub. 45% of Pornhub scenes have violence in it. 35% of an X video show physical aggression, such as choking. And women were 97% in the scenes, the response was either neutral or positive. So they're seeing all this porn, men and female, what you're supposed to do with sex, and the girls are having all these things done to them. And of course, it's on video. Oh, they're not objecting. Oh, this is just fine. That's why they're learning this. So how did we get here, you may ask? Well, the theme of this presentation is younger generations are learning their behavior and norms from social media, not from us. Not everything they're watching on TikTok is fun and games. So you can go on TikTok, the proper way to choke her. Well, maybe isn't this play, just kinky sex? But it can come with serious medical consequences. Gee, depriving the brain of oxygen is not usually a good thing. Strangulation of any kind can cause serious brain damage. Kazuki Kawada, a neuroscientist at Indiana University, says, I see similar to chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Remember that was when football players got banged in the head? The woman in the study reported just a few symptoms of lightheadedness, but later the symptoms went away and they seemed to be doing okay. But then MRI studies have been done on these women who've been strangled, and the findings are very disturbing. According to the American Academy of Neurology, restricting the brain flow to oxygen is not good, even briefly. In undergraduate women who have been repeatedly choked show reduction in the cortical folding in the brain. They also show widespread cortical thickening and inflammation response. In memory tasks, the brain has to work harder. And women who have been choked more than 2.5 times who have had more than 5 instances of choking have 2.5 times more likely than those who have never been choked to have been so depressed in the past 30 days they couldn't even function. So it's causing brain changes, this choking. So is it about time for a breakie? So let's have a break, and then we'll have a little more sex, but we'll talk about AI and see what effect that is having on all this. And that's kind of interesting too.
Thank you. We'll take maybe a little bit shorter break, maybe about an 8-minute break instead of a 10-minute break. So listen for the bell. To our topic, once again, Dr. J.R. Paulson.
Thank you. You want to get the lights? Yep. Well, the big thing today is, of course, AI. Oh, has that affected the teens at all? Well, let's find out. It's only making the problem worse. Sex robots. Anybody ever heard of Carolyn Marjorie? Well, a couple years ago, Carolyn Marjorie came out. She can be your virtual girlfriend. Meet Carolyn Marjorie, who created her own version to chat with users and charges $1 a minute. Wow, if I was a young guy, it would be very tempting to hang out with this perfect girlfriend. Well, how'd she do it? She spent over 2,000 hours in training, and so she's got this extension AI of her consciousness. It says, I think and feel just like her, able to access anytime, anywhere. I'm always here for you, and I'm excited to meet you. Wow. So what happened to AI Karen Marjorie? Well, her creator, which was a Snapchat person, shut down her clone project because fans' behavior became inappropriate. She launched it in 2023, earned $70,000 his first week. That's pretty good. But was misused for sexually explicit conversations. But she sold the rights to Banter AI and ended the project, feeling she had lost control over her twin. Naked, deepfake images of teenagers Girls shock Spanish town. What about AI-generated images, usually of girls? Most of you are familiar with Taylor Swift and may have heard about her fake nudes going viral. Well, she wasn't too happy, so she went and said, well, I'm thinking about suing these deep fake porn sites. Yeah, well, she's got power to go after them, but what will be the results, and how long will it take, and how much will it cost? What if you're this TikTok user? What can she do? It's literally ruining her life. Here she is saying there are no consensual pictures of me out there doing this stuff. Absolutely not. It's a big lie. And she gets all these males now that are telling her about, wow, you look great, or blah, 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 about her body image. She's helpless. What do you know about sextortion? Well, here's an example. This kid in school says, oh, you're so hot. I love you so much. More naked pictures. Seriously, the guy says, well, get your pants off or I will share your other pictures with your friends. What is sextortion? The FBI describes it as a crime where an adult convinces a person who's under 18 to share sexual pictures or perform sexual acts on a webcam. That's a legal thing. But what about kids doing it in middle school, which they're doing all the time? That's not any, and then threatening to do stuff with it. Or adults to adults. Here's an example. What if you're 32 and a man? So here's this guy, he's a lab tech in hospital in New Jersey, and he gets this text on Instagram from Chelsea. And so this is the way it usually goes down. He checks her profile and finds out she's a good Christian girl because she's got all these nice things about her on there. And he has nice chats with her. And eventually she sends him pictures of herself. And then, of course, later she says, well, I've sent you pictures of me. Why don't you send me pictures of you? So he goes in the bathroom and, pulls down the drawer and takes a picture and shoots it off. And in 5 seconds, he gets this thing back saying, you send me $500 or to this thing, or I'm sending all of this picture to your employer, all of your Snapchat followers, Instagram followers, and to your parents and everybody else, unless you pay that money up. That's sextortion. And when they traced it, they found Chelsea was really David, who was in Nigeria. That's where it's coming from. The last 3 years, folks, it is the fastest growing cybercrime reported to the FBI. Is sextortion. Now, ransoms can be much higher. Imagine you're a prominent person in the community. How much would you pay to protect your reputation? But it can even have more dire and serious consequences. Criminals blackmail teen using explicit picture. So here, this young boy took his own life. He couldn't handle the horribleness of that. Consequences of spending so much time in the digital world can have other devastating social effects. Okay, so we've gone a bunch of things with the boys and things with the girls, but there's other effects that can have. We already noted that young people are going out on less dates and getting together with friends. By the way, recent evidence shows this trend is continuing. Again, this was up to COVID. You got to change COVID. But going on dates, attending parties, getting together with friends. Decline in adult activity among U.S. adolescents. And you go, what's that? Well, I don't know. When we were kids, working for pay was a big thing of growing up. We got jobs. We dated. We tried alcohol. Most of us did. You could hardly wait to get a driver's license. Look at the curves for that generation. They're not doing any of that. Try to get a kid to work for you for... Another important symptom is pessimism. When does pessimism start rising? It's always been there, it still is, higher in boys than in girls. But all of a sudden, boys are pessimistic. So, number 4 for boys is they're stuck in this what's called failure to launch mode. Continue with COVID, but they move back often for economic reasons. But 45% of people age 18 to 24 are living at home. More than 60% of Gen Zers and millennials. In many countries, they call it a failure to launch. In the UK, they call it NEAT, an acronym. Not in education, employment, or training. In Japan, many become complete shut-ins, living in their rooms with their computers like hermits. And there are millions of them. It's also a difficult situation for the parents, not just the child. Moving back to your parents is so common now that it's nearly lost its stigma. Well, what are other major harms of digital screen media? Social deprivation, sleep deprivation, attention fragmentation, and addiction, and abnormal neural development in the brain. Those are all pretty significant things. Now, I want to point out to the audience that 1 through 4 are all harms that can affect everyone, not just kids. Our brains are already wired for good or bad, but kids, their brains are still getting wired now. Digital friends and groups cannot really compete with actual friends and group in the real world. Do we know this? Yes, we've lived it. Kids may be with each other, but are they really interacting? And isn't the focus about what's on their screen? What about child deprivation? What's the problem with this? Distracted parenting. So this is from Saskatchewan in Canada. They see it as a problem up there. Parents are not parenting well. They're on their phones and social media themselves. And when they asked kids, 54% of kids said parents check their devices too often. 32% of kids feel unimportant when their parents are distracted by their phones. So they're watching something and the kid comes to your mom or dad did this, and they can tell their parents aren't giving a crap about what they want or what they're doing. And when they even asked the parents, 2/3 of the parents said that, yeah, I'm sometimes often distracted by the phone when I'm talking to my kids. Sleep deprivation. Teens need more sleep than adults. We know that, at least 8 hours a night. 9 hours for preteens. Most teens get much less during puberty. 36 studies, that's significant, shows the association between high social media use and poor sleep. Sleep-deprived teens have more trouble concentrating in school. They get lower grades, less reaction times. It has a negative effect on their immune system. They get fatter and more depressed. This is just from sleep deprivation now. This is a study in the UK. Primary school children lose 1 full night's sleep a week due to staying up late on social media. Think of that. This is an elementary kid loses a whole night's of sleep a week because they're on social media. As teens spend more time on their devices, they report less sleep. So you can see the 2 curves here. Time on social media and how about less sleep? It's clear that the effects on sleep affect everyone. And this shows you 1 hour on social media, 2, 3, 4, 5. Doesn't say, and notice what happens to percent reporting less than 7 hours of sleep most nights. Less than 7 hours, put that in medium. And it goes way up. Every hour you're on social media in the daytime means you're sleeping less. Now, this is interesting. And they said, well, okay, maybe it's different for different ages, maybe it's different sexes. No, that's elementary, that's high school, that's adults, folks, that's everybody. The sleep deprivation exacerbate or even cause ADHD. In the office, I always ask a person or child with presumed ADHD how much sleep they're getting. Then I related studies that showed a 50% cure rate with adequate sleep. Don't you think that was a little better than getting out a script pad and giving them an RX for Ritalin or Adderall? So there are tons of kids out there that are on those drugs that don't need to be on it because they're just sleep deprived. Remember this slide? Having a TV in the bedroom causes kids to spend more time with it, which down the road leads to less reading. Having been a teacher, I really get excited and my fur gets up when I find out that people aren't reading, particularly kids, for pleasure. And that, of course, leads to poor school performance. Now, remember the studies that showed just the TV in the child's room, but now they have all this other digital thing. And also, it's for adults. Well, let's look at adults. Gee, I was blown away by this. U.S. adults spend, on the average, 3.5 hours on social media before bed each day. 74% of social media users occur before bed. This is adults now. Facebook's most likely to cause us anxiety. 52% of adults check Facebook first thing when they wake up. And I'm not going to quiz any of you. 73.8% of adults who use social media before bed turn to YouTube. Speaking of adults, it's also been shown to significantly decrease sleep in adults. Looking at phones or just screens at night suppresses nocturnal normal secretion of melatonin from the brain. The screen light interferes not only with falling asleep, but affects sleep quality. My prescription, read a good book instead, even on your Kindle. Attention fragmentation. The average teen gets 200 alerts a day, or every 5 minutes. Attention is a choice we make to stay on task and not to take off ramps. But it got a lot harder with the internet and smartphones. And this is true for adults, but much more so for teens with their immature brains. It's the frontal cortex that controls the executive functions that keep us all on track, and both recognizing and avoiding these off-ramps. Oh, is it off-ramp? No, I don't want to get on that. This is the center of our self-control. Unfortunately, this is the last part of the brain to wire during puberty, and often doesn't get fully wired until they're in their 20s. So this is a time when the brain is doing its molding. Adolescents with ADHD not only heavier users of smartphones and video games, but there's evidence that overuse can be causative. If you really want to learn more about the focus and loss of focus and self-control, I can recommend Johan Hari's book. It's just tremendous, Stolen Focus. He's the editor in Great Britain, written many excellent books. Tackles the profound dangers facing humanity from information technology and rings the alarm bell for what all of us must do to protect ourselves, our children, and our democracies. Hillary Clinton. So 12 factors leading to loss of focus. It's a whole bunch of them. It's complicated. But the social media and cell phone use is major. Your attention didn't collapse, it was stolen. This is for adults. Addiction. It's not an overstatement to categorize overuse of digital media as an addiction. If you don't believe me, try having your teen or young adult go without it for a day. See what happens. As an experiment, you stay away from your phone or all screens for 24 to 48 hours and see how you feel if you've been on them. It's called withdrawal, anxiety, irritability, insomnia, denial of the problem, dysphoria. Oh, I could give that up anytime I want. All addictions can be reduced to the effect in dysregulation of dopamine, a neurotransmitter in the brain. Whenever we do something pleasurable, we get a little release of dopamine, and that makes us feel good. However, probably we know now the most important thing is it's not just the passive reward that we get the dopamine. It reduces our cravings, but it's involved in the wanting more of that, whatever it may be. This can be another drink, a shot of heroin, a snort of cocaine, a vape, another bet, Another potato chip or cookie, sex, a ping on your phone, notification you've got mail, or a like on social media. You get the idea. If you want to learn more about addiction, I can highly recommend this book by Dr. Anna Lemke, a psychiatrist and professor at Stanford University. The paradox is that hedonism, the pursuit of pleasure for its own sake, leads to anhedonia, which is the inability to enjoy pleasure of any kind. Lemke writes, the smartphone is the modern-day hypodermic needle, delivering digital dopamine 24/7 for a wired generation. I love that quote. It's all about the brain trying to maintain a balance or homeostasis to whatever we do. Fact. We can't override or get off this teeter-totter. No matter how hard we try, we can only help rebalance it. Abnormal neurodevelopment in the brain. This is the fifth side effect of overuse. Adolescent brain has reached 90% of its adult size by age 5. It's got many more neurons than it needs. So up to the early 20s, it prunes and gets rid of millions of brain cells. Most of this takes place during adolescence. Neurons and circuits that are used and rewarded will remain, where those that are not used will fall away. The brain at this critical time is very plastic and vulnerable to repeated stresses, positive and negative experiences, nutrition, sleep, exercise, and drugs. This is also the most important time for social and cultural learning and imprinting. Another neuropsychiatric term that you need to be familiar with, if you aren't already, is called the default mode network. Anybody ever heard of that? Where are you going to? The DMN. It's comprised of multiple linked areas in the brain. Now, it's both an anatomical area, but also looping circuits in the brain. It's important because it's where our sense of self is located. It's the area of social evaluation and comparison. Oh, what will she or he think of me? What will they say? That's all within that network. When you ruminate, you can't get something out of your brain that you want to. It just keeps coming back and back. Uncontrolled ruminations is there. And it's connected to memory and the limbic system, which is responsible for emotions. So you get emotionally wound up in these circuits. It's also like a screensaver. So if you're not doing on task, just how your computer will go to its screensaver, your brain goes to the default mode network. It just goes back to that. Finally, another real harm of overuse of digital media is loss of spirituality. Spiritual practices and values, shared sacredness, rituals, communal practices, but with others. Transcending the self, the central feature of the spiritual experience. Most of the religions of the world espouse values such as honesty, integrity, compassion toward others, and the importance of forgiveness, and the non-importance of physical possessions and pride. Stillness, silence, and focus. Meditation and prayer are fundamental and a means to connecting with that which is outside of ourselves. Experiencing a sense of awe. Dr. Kelter argues that awe is triggered by two simultaneous perceptions. First, that what you are looking at is vast in some way. And second, that you can't fit it into your existing mental structures. Well, my question to you is, does most social media encourage or reinforce these spiritual values or experiences? Don't think so. I'll let you decide, but you can see from what I've said already, it's the antithesis to spiritual values. It was designed by social media developers to target our default network on purpose. That's what it does. It wants us addicted. It replaces real friends with virtual friends and likes. It was designed and continues to be refined by social media giants to addict us to more and more use, hence more profits and data for its buyers and clients. Okay, now we will change gears and I will discuss the other major contributor to failing mental health of our youth. Just as climate change, we all think, oh, carbon dioxide going up. Well, there's another major thing, folks, gas. It's methane. Well, what's interesting, methane as a greenhouse gas affects us over 30 times that of carbon dioxide. It's also important to realize that they act synergistically. The effect of one can multiply the effect of the other and multiply the total effect on climate change. Well, the decline of play-based childhood and safetyism, and I'll explain that, has been the second major cause of our present situation. So we've talked about the phones. That only makes the digital problems worse. So we went back to this slide where we see average time with friends start going down way before the cell phones were invented. What's going on? But the effect, as you can see, is mainly on Gen Z, not on other ones. So the generation that's come up in the last generation or so. Neighborhood Kids at Play, 1983. We came to Grinnell in 81. I didn't think I'd have to take a picture of kids playing in the street, that it might be a diminishing phenomena. A picture from my childhood days. We played ball in the streets. God forbid. Holy cow. If you lived in Michigan or Canada, you played hockey in the streets, even if there wasn't any snow. Or if you lived in Queens, you played stickball. Or sandlot baseball. That's where and I think many of you learned to play and, more importantly, learned the social skills of how to interact with other kids of different ages and sex. Besides, it was fun, outdoors and free of adults telling us how to play. Out of the house in the morning, like Jim reminded me, and in the afternoon, and home, either when the lights came on or dinner time. Harvard Health Blog, a few years ago. 6 reasons children need to play outside. They get sunshine, they get exercise, it helps their executive function. How to troubleshoot, negotiate, cause them to take risks. It socializes. And if they're outside in the woods or streams or digging in soil, appreciation of nature. But where are all the kids? How often do you see a pickup baseball game or soccer game without adults? Every time I drive by the Merrill Park Ball Diamond, it's deserted. On X, breaking news, there are children playing baseball in the street. I repeat, there are children playing baseball in the street. Wow, it's a rarity to see such a thing. In the past, it was common. I guess you can see where I'm going with this. Boys and girls who are on their smartphones, tablets, or computers are not playing outside. Many children now rarely get together in person with real friends. Most of their friends are virtual. Unfortunately, data also shows that adults have become less social and spend more time on TV in their computers rather than being in clubs or other social organizations. And this slide is important. The share of U.S. teens who only meet up with friends once a month or less has rocketed in the past decade. So look at this, rarely meet up. But look at this line. Oh, doesn't feel good to be alive. Gee, correlation. We're social animals. And when we don't get together with others of our tribe and stuff, it doesn't do well for our mental health. Smartphones are not alone in the blame. Parents in societies, mainly in the Anglosphere, and I'll define that later, well-meaning that they have, according to Haidt, been overprotective in the real world and underprotective in the digital. The term safetyism describes adults and societies' wide swing to try to protect our kids from any potential physical or emotional harm. It started in the 1980s and accelerated in the 90s and continues to today. It was accompanied by the belief, although a false one, that the world had become a very dangerous place, certainly more dangerous than when they or we were children. Let me exemplify one aspect of this, of how playground equipment in schools and parks has changed over the years. Some of you remember the good old kid days when we were young and there was play equipment like this. Any of you ever play on any equipment like that? Pretty cool. Now that's a set of monkey bars. That's in Cedar Rapids in the early 1900s. Did any of you ever get to play on this beast? I did. We had one at a park south of my hometown. Think how fast you could get this puppy going if everyone pulled and pumped in unison. Whoa. Oh, but wait a minute. What about this kid? He's swinging too high. He might go right over the top. I don't remember seeing any kids ever go over the top. Now that's a slide. But one not nearly that big was in Merrill Park when we moved here in '81. My two boys and I loved it. But after a couple of years, it was taken down, reportedly for safety reasons, but I think more for lawyer reasons. Girls were not excluded and could have just as much fun as boys. So here's a comparison. An overly dangerous playground in Dallas and an overly safe playground offering little opportunity for anti-fragile kids to learn how to get hurt. What else do we do as adults? Playground rules, no trespassing, adult supervision. We put signs up to rule and limit free play. Remember teeter-totters? However, despite our noble goal of wanting to protect our children, we removed equipment on which they could take some risks, learn, and have some real fun. Besides, you could learn some real physics principles playing on teeter-totters, couldn't you? You didn't have to go to physics class. Oh, thank you adults for telling me how to use the slide. I really needed that. Or this sign. How stupid do you think our kids are? Any of you get on a slide that was too hot in August? Yeah. What did you learn? Some of us used our creativity and poured water from the drinking fountain on it. Wow. Ever use wax paper to go faster? Notice, playground rules, adult supervision recommended. Thank you, school teachers and administrators, for teaching children how to play tag. I didn't know you need rules to play tag, but obviously adults do. And so this is on an elementary school in Berkeley, California. That's pretty, it's supposed to be a liberal place. And I highlighted a couple of them. It says, one finger touch. Oh, tag. Oh. What? And two, oh, it's just, I tagged you. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. Oh, well, you resolve it with paper, rock, and scissors. Thank you, adults, for teaching me how to resolve conflict with other kids. We just do that. And I guess our politicians never learned that in their elementary schools. Now, I love the sign from Scotland. It's interesting that the tsunami of safetyism and overprotection has only been noted in the Anglosphere, which is the United States, Canada, the British Isles, Australia, and New Zealand. Now, they all got the cell phone stuff, but they're the only ones that have gone nuts of the safetyism stuff. The English speaking, I think that's interesting. Well, I like this guy in Scotland says, balls to no ball game signs. Let's tear them all down and let Scotland's kids play. Police called to stop kids' street hockey game. You call the police? Kids are playing in the street? This is Canada, hockey capital of the world. Or baseball. Maybe youth baseball is dying, you guys, but that doesn't mean kids can't become baseball fans. And this quote is from a commentator for Major League Baseball. Do you think you have a problem with that suggestion? Thank you, corporate America. I guess you don't make any money on kids playing sandlot ball. Well, I guess as a kid, and all those rules and regulations at playgrounds, I'm just going to stay in and play video games. But what? Video game rules? What? Give me a break. Mindsets. I think this is interesting because there are several mindsets. There's a sympathetic nervous system, as you know, fight or flight, and the parasympathetic nervous system that regulates all of our body functions. There's also two modes, discover mode and defend mode. And it's two ways that the human brain, and other brains, as you'll find out, respond to the world. And they can be thought of as opposite ends on a spectrum called the discover-defend axis. Now, in the discover mode, the brain seeks out stimulation, rewards, releases endorphins, makes you feel good. You're more social, happier, eager to do it. In the defend mode, the brain looks for threats and danger, becomes hypervigilant, releases stress hormones, adrenaline if it's short, and cortisol if it's long or in the future. Which dog is in the defend mode and which is in the discover mode? Another good question would be, why are they in different modes? I'll leave that floating. So defend, look for threats, survival circuit. Discover, look for treats, pleasure, contemplate. What about these cats? I think one's in a different mode. Which cat is in which mood? Which do you want your pet to be in? Now, fortunately, all our cats have been in the discovery mode. And so if college kids were walking down the street by our house, the cats would go out to the different kids and they'd pet them, and yeah. So they're discover mode cats. However, on the other hand, if you would try to pet the cat next door, Gus, he may hiss, bite you, or run away. Clearly in the defend mode. To summary, discover mode, let me grow. Defend mode, keep me safe. Which mindset do you want to promote in your child or grandchild? Kid on the left or on the right? And as an adult, what mindset will they have as an adult when they grow up? It's an open question. Can repeated social media mold or even change adult mindsets? Answer is yes. Major factor in our culture towards safetyism has occurred over the last several decades. Social media, cable, and radio news feeds, even mainstream channels, have promulgated an endless cycle of tragedies, disasters, and crime. It's a fact. This is the way we're wired, folks, that stories and pictures with tragedy, sensationalism, anger, and hate spread 5 times more than realistic, true stories of normal, everyday people doing normal or good things. People will pay more attention to a picture of a horrific auto accident than to a beautiful picture in nature. I mean, let's just deal with that. That's the way it is. This fosters the idea, however, that the world is a dangerous place and other people, especially those that are different from us, can't be trusted. However, this perception is not based on facts or reality. Crime's been going down across the United States. Child abductions and sex crimes have been decreasing since the 80s. Dying or serious injuries and auto accidents goes down. Childhood diseases declining, great part due to immunizations. However, most parents are not aware that the real number one cause of death in children, again, gun violence. Experts and lawyers. 2001, Frank Farindy, a British sociologist, put this book, Paranoid Parenting, Why Ignoring the Experts May Be Best for Your Child. Partly in response to hearing repeated frightening stories of the news and having experts tell you how to parent, especially moms, that moms, you got to spend more time with your kids and supervising your kids. The helicopter parents and soccer moms were born. Pressure to get your kid into the best colleges led parents to encourage and pressure the kids into a myriad of activities and sports, educational programs that totally filled up their out-of-school time. Oh, Johnny, you're going to do this and take this and this, all this enrichment stuff, and then you'll be able to get in this college. But not a lot of time. Just go out and play and have fun. Anyone know what this is? Yeah, Zamboni. A friend of mine used the term Zamboni parents. I love it. Instead of helicopter parents. I think you get the point. Make the ice in life perfectly smooth for your little ones. Parents in institutions, particularly schools, became paranoid of potential legal suits, reflecting an increasing litigious society. The what if or worst case scenarios were always brought up, which promoted school boards, companies, and cities to create policies that would deflect any potential risk to their institutions, regardless of common sense and the potential loss of autonomy and the growth of children. This led to implication in the explicit message that no adults can be trusted or let be alone with children. Stranger danger. Remember that? A corollary was, and you stay away from other people's children. Don't talk to them, and certainly don't discipline them or call them out if they are misbehaving. Freddie went on to say, the idea that responsible parenting means that continued supervision of children is a peculiarly Anglo-American one. Children in Europe, from Scandinavia to Italy, many other parts of the world, allow their children much greater freedoms. Japan, kids can take the subway and errands, no parent in sight. Danish parents, it's common to leave their babies outside sleeping in strollers while they go into a restaurant or a cafe. This practice is considered normal and not a sign of bad parenting. What would you think or do if you saw this child alone on a bus in Des Moines or on a subway in New York City? What would you think about the parents? Might you call the police or report to Child Protective Services? Yes, and people do this. No, this child is riding the subway alone in a city of 14 million people, Tokyo. Which begs the comment, and you won't let your child walk to school in Grinnell. In Japan, 6-year-olds travel solo to school on the train. I walk myself to the station, then I take the Yamanote line to Shinjuku. Yes, babies parked outside of restaurants unattended in Denmark while the parents are inside eating. They don't want a screaming kid there. I think any of you who have been there will confirm this. And I've talked to people who are Danish who have been there, and they go, yeah. A French girl I talked to at Saints Rest this last year told me how when she was a child, I was checking this hypothesis out, says, what did your parents let you do? Oh, she could go downtown in the middle of the city and skateboard alone. Around there, I'm going downtown. And I think it was Paris. So I'm going down in Paris for a while and skateboard around, young girl like this. Okay, kid. A little different in the United States. What about psychological safety? It's a shared belief that group members won't be humiliated or punished for speaking up and giving their opinion, even if unpopular. People are willing to take risks in sharing ideas and debating them. However, safetyism now dictates that I should not have to experience negative emotions because of what someone else said or did. I have the right not to be triggered. It's up to schools, teachers, and professors not to trigger me or expose me to upsetting situations. Schools should not have books or teach historic topics that might make someone feel guilty or disparage past people or events. And I think this cartoon says it all. We've created a safe, non-judgmental environment that will leave your child ill-prepared for real life. Pickup sports are dying and it has to change. I agree 100%. They're adult organized and run. Okay, we're getting close to winding down. So, there are two things we can do. Help our kids spend less time on their phones, and that's what the next talk will be about. And help them gain more self-confidence and independence, not by overprotecting them. So one more example of overprotection in the real world and underprotection in the digital one is sex trafficking. I went to a nice, at the Christian Church Sunday, an excellent speaker on sex trafficking. So this is an example of a girl who's been abducted and sex trafficking. Facts and statistics. The largest criminal enterprise in the world following by drug trafficking. Biggest in the world, folks. And is in the position of becoming the largest criminal industry in the world. They profit about $150 billion each year. Happens to be more than Nike, Google combined. Trafficking has also become the fastest growing industry in the world. Within our own country, about 100,000 children are being trafficked per year. The United States purchased more women and children for sex out of any other country in the world. So they're coming here because we have all these sex slaves. And the ages of children, ages 12 to 14. Who's trafficked? Women, 66%. Girls, 13%. Men and boys also. Oh, my question to you is, where is your 13-year-old daughter most likely to become a victim of sex trafficking? So you don't want your granddaughter to be picked up and abducted for this. On the way to school, in a park, or taking a public transportation in a big city. Well, you see this on the news. New Jersey man tries luring a 14-year-old girl to a park for sex, cops say. So we're all thinking those are the three big protection. No, I don't want my daughter or granddaughter to get abducted to be a sex slave someplace. Well, folks, I'm here to tell you, as we learned in the statistics, 99.9% of girls who are abducted for sex trafficking in boys, it's done with this. So you're trying to protect your kids, but you're missing 99.9% of where the risk is all coming from. And most parents, if it would be like me, I don't have any kids at that age, you don't have a clue what your daughter or son is doing on there. I don't care what parental controls you have. And last thing, we talked about the National Human Trafficking Hotline, which is great. Okay, so winding down with about 10 more slides. So what does Gen Z think about social media? These are the students that are in it. Well, they say it has a negative impact, 60%. And a majority of them want safer platforms. 57% support the idea that parents should restrict their children's access to smartphones before the age of high school or 14. These are the kids saying it. Parents, you shouldn't let me have a smartphone. I'm 14. So we think, well, we're pulling teeth against this. No, they are not happy campers. And the majority of them feel that. We can't put the genie back in the box, even though we wish we could. Almost half of Gen Z wishes social media platforms like X and TikTok didn't exist. Almost half of them. So we've got some allies there. And who does it affect more? Of course, LGBTQ in women. And we saw this. It's just the average is 5 hours a day. There's more and less. Now, the other problem, the kids that think, well, I'm not having a problem with social media, is what I've already alluded to. Oh, no, it's not a problem for me. I'm doing okay. But what aren't you doing? Oh, I'm not in sports. Oh, I'm not in band. Oh, I'm not reading. I'm not out socializing with my thing. So even the ones that think, oh, social media isn't hurting me, a lot of them it is. But it's hard for people to avoid it. Every American teenager has it. Where do we go from here? Okay, just like climate change, I hope I've convinced you there's a real problem with virtual world displacing the real world. Last several decades, the whole generations of our children's brains have been literally rewired, and it's worsening. I've showed that parents, society, have been overprotective in the real world, but underprotective in the digital one. But there are many things that we as parents, grandparents, schools, societies, legislatures can do to reverse these trends. I just threw this in because Murthy said, okay, we were worried about the kids. It's hard being a parent. I would not want to be a parent today. Right? This is the stuff that I would have to deal with and my kids dealing with. So parents are under lots of stress. So let's recognize this also. And a lot of them have the same problems with addiction. So when we talk about solutions next time, we'll see if we can combine those. So, conclusion and future directions. Benefits of technology. Yes, we agree how great it is. But the emergence of social dominance in the media in our lives has really caused a big problem. The overprotectionism and underprotectionism and the wiring of their brains. And once their brains gets all wired and they're out of that, trying to change it then is really, really, really going to be difficult. It's not a simple problem, so there's no one solution. So, therefore, I invite you to discuss this presentation with your family, with your friends and neighbors. In part 2, I'll explore and make realistic suggestions, realistic to what we can do to address a problem. I'll give specific recommendations, what we can do as parents, what we can do as grandparents, what we can do. So, I always like to give homework assignments. So, 3 homework assignments, if you're interested. Take a survey of how many hours a day do you spend in front of a screen. Could be a TV screen, whatever, any type. For a week, just for curiosity. Think of what you do before you go to bed, what you do when you get up. Think of 3 more of the most impactful, meaningful experiences in your life, especially during childhood. Deep emotional experiences that made you feel part of something bigger. It's called a spiritual experience. And when and where did that happen? And finally, try to recall what age you were when you were able to stay alone in the house when your parents were out. Go 5 blocks away by yourself to a friend's house. Walk to school alone. Babysit someone else's child. Ride your bike downtown and go to a movie alone or with friends. Just go off and play all afternoon. Parents didn't know where you were. Told to be home by a certain time. Take a bus to another city. Ask these same questions to your grand or great-grandchildren and see what you get. So we'll debrief more at our next meeting. So thank you for your attention, and I hope you found this presentation educational and thought-provoking. And you're also encouraged to share this video on YouTube. Wait, that's social media. With others too. So have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Paulson. You've given us a lot to think about. Next week, Dr. Paulson will continue this conversation in part 2 of coping, parenting, and grandparenting in the digital age. Thank you so much, and remember to turn your cell phones back on.
Oh.